Episode begins now. We're talking star defensive linemen tonight. We've hit a lot of positions along the way. We've hit a lot of schemes. We'll be back in the 4-2-5, which feels like home to me after having to dive into the 3-4 system this year and run a 3-4. I love when a tight end's on the field so that I can just pretend for like a snap that it's back to the old 4-2-5 ways. Anyway, back home in the 4-2-5. We're talking about star defensive linemen. We're going to cover all the positions, tackles, ends, I guess nose. If that's, I mean, you just kind of have two tackles and a 1 and a 3 and probably in head.
Well, they're different. We'll talk about it because they are different.
There we go. So first question right off the bat here. What does a star defensive lineman look like? And it sounds like we have 3 positions to cover.
Well, 4. I mean, if we're doing 4-2-5, we look at what are the traits that we really want. And I'll talk about what a star, the stud of your defensive line looks like. The stud of your defensive line typically is the 3 tech. It's the guy, for everybody who hasn't learned all of the techniques, which is perfectly fine, but they're in the first module of the 4-2-5 defense system. He's outside shade of the guard on the strong side. And that 3 tech is odd numbers or outside shades. That 3 tech is the critical player. He's the one who's going to take on that guard tackle double team on the strong side, that combo. And he, if he can beat a double team, then you really can't go to the strong side. I mean, he just dominates. And so what that guy looks like is the traditional defensive lineman. He's the, if we want to talk numbers, he's, 6 foot, 280, and he's actually pretty quick. He runs for a big man, he runs a 5.0, and I mean, he's got all the tools, and he's active, and he's physical, and he can run, and he's got it all. He's the biggest, best athlete that there is on the field, the most athletic big man on the field.
Yeah,
and it's your Warren Sapp. It's your it's that guy, like that stud, Richard Seymour, and like these guys that are just that were just absolute animals. I mean, even like a Vince Wilfork, who was so enormous, but also, a 400-pounder who can dunk a basketball. He could. And so, these types of guys, that's your 3 tech. He's the guy that you think about when you think defensive line, defensive tackle. Your second star is at the strong end, and the strong end closes off the C gap and handles the tight end. And a lot of teams, that's where they're running. They're running power, even outside zone. He's getting a good rush on the passer if you don't have a tight end. But that guy looks like, in high school terms, 6 foot, 6'1", 220, maybe 240. He can run even faster. He can run a 4.9, maybe a 4.8. Like, he can motor for a big man. And he's got a motor. Like, he doesn't take plays off. That's your ideal guy there. He probably looks like a tight end, maybe a little bit bigger than a high school tight end a lot of times. To whereas your D tackle looks more like an offensive lineman. Of course, at the high school level, they're all offensive linemen because we don't have that many kids over 200 pounds. So it's like, hey, buddy, you're an offensive lineman. So that's your strong end. He's your second best defensive lineman, but he is an athlete. It's interesting because we usually talk about the nose, and from the nose standpoint, you think of him as being another defensive tackle. And so in terms of being a star, the second big man you have isn't going to be a star. So in theory, he wouldn't be a star. But I've had teams and I've played teams where that nose was more of the shooter nose. And that's where you can take the kid who's a wrestler, who's anywhere from 130 pounds to, 190 pounds, and just nasty and just causes havoc and causes chaos. And he can be a star at the nose, to whereas he might not be able to be a star anywhere else on the football field.
Right.
One of the best ones we ever saw was a 130-pound wrestler. I think he was state champion, maybe runner up, and he was unblockable. But he was 130 pounds. He couldn't play anywhere else. He wasn't a running back. Couldn't catch, I don't think. Too short to be a corner at an elite level, at a star level. He could play any of those things, but not at a star level. But at the nose, he was unblockable. And that made him a star. He was so quick, had such control of his body. Same thing with the weak side end. In theory, he's, another strong end, but just not quite as good. So he's not going to be a star. We take that, usually that, we have our battle for the safeties, strong safety, weak safety, free safety. One of those guys turns out to not be as good playing in space, and he loses that battle. But we don't have a lot of big men in high school football. And so we take that fourth safety and we sometimes just put him in a 2-point stance or put him in a cocked 3-point stance, jet him and just let him go. Let him run. And to me, at the high school level, that's what a star weak side end looks like. He looks like a safety. And he's just cut loose and causing havoc. That doesn't mean that I think it's important to point out, that doesn't mean that the ideal offensive line or defensive line is a stud 3-tech, a little smaller, but also pretty good, strong end, and then a wrestler kid at nose and a safety at weekend. That's not what I'm saying. That's how you can use kids and make them stars in those positions. The best is probably having 4 really good defensive linemen.
Right. But we don't have that.
But it's not the reality of the situation.
For most of us, right.
For most of us. And so, and again, can you have a star 3-tech and a star 1-tech? Yes, but then the 1-tech isn't the star because the 3-tech is by nature of the beast better. He should be. They can both be really good, but only one of them is the star. How can we make that other guy unique and a star? It's in those ways.
Yeah, I think what you were talking about, like being able to utilize different body types there, that I have fell in love with that idea, and I've introduced it everywhere I went, and people are like, maybe we're not going to do that. I'm like, okay, it's your call, right? Because
and so you end up.
I want to roll down that safety, but I also don't want to burn through my O-line, and I've never been anywhere where I could 2 platoon. So
that's a big.
If I can save reps off your O-line, and I can take those 5 O-linemen and roll them in at the 3-tech, half of them play strong end, and then I can use my extra safeties and linebacker types on the other side. Like, let's go, man. I mean, that to me, it just sounds like, personnel management, but what do I know? I'm just a football coach. So, but yeah, it's nice to have 2 different variations of that. Yes, I mean, if you can't put 6'6" and 310 or 315 at every position, then what does the next star look like? Because that's obviously what the star looks like, right? Like,
yeah.
That's the guy that's going anywhere he wants. He's going to go play Georgia.
Oh, who's the star defensive end? Well, it's, his NFL career has been not quite at that level, but Jadeveon Clowney was the greatest high school football player that ever walked the face of the earth. If you ever saw Jadeveon Clowney, I think he was at Sumter, South Carolina. No, he was at South Hill.
I don't know. I'm going to help you out with the Google machine.
It's up in South Carolina, down in South Carolina. And I haven't been down to 85 because I haven't been back to Atlanta in a long time.
South Point High School?
South Point. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
He was amazing and he was incredible. Well, of course he was. He was in a freak body playing against kids. Like, yeah, that's what a star looks like.
Yeah.
But
you can make a star out of other body types.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the role of each of these positions in the 4-2-5. I know that some people play their people different. and I'm learning that. So truly, you have to think about 4-2-5. As I've gotten more into coaching, I realize some people just think it's an even front or an odd front. I've been in communication with a coach recently that his DC runs a 4-2-5 and runs in a 9 tech and goes outside with his D end, and I'm like, what about C gap, homie? What are we gonna do here?
I've talked to college coaches who do that, and I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I can't mean if it's working, again, you better know your system.
Yeah.
And do you have reasons for it? Why does that, is that working? Do you have reasons? Does it make sense? What I find more often than not is we don't have reasons for it. We had some trauma in our life with a 6 tech one day and just decided never again. That's the kind of thing that happens.
I see. Yeah. So let's talk the role of these guys. We might as well. I mean, we can start with the 3 tech. You said he's supposed to be the stud. What's his role?
1 man cannot block me. 2 men cannot move me. That's the Ricky Kuhn, who's been on our podcast, talked about it. Defense coordinator at Southeast Missouri State.
Like number Missouri. 9 or 10 in the nation right now. So let's go SEMO.
Yeah, SEMO. Yeah, he's got to go on there. Which is, I mean, he deserves that. He's worked his butt off, and he's doing a great job. That was one of the things I got from Ricky back when we were at Ellsworth College, and you preach that to the entire defensive line, but there's one guy that it's absolutely got to be true for. If you single block my 3 tech, especially because your best offensive lineman's probably at like let's say the tackle, and he's on the guard, who's probably not one of your best. If you single block my 3 tech, not good. If you double team him, he's going to hip into that guy and he's going to work to split it, but he ain't going anywhere. And we don't teach him to screw his shoulder into the ground or fall to his knee or cry or turn in the fetal position, because I'm not going to sit there and run a drill where I teach a kid how to get the piss whipped out of him.
Right.
That's not fun coaching to me. I'm going to teach him how to beat it. So anyway, that's his job. He is, not just B gap. I don't like teaching gaps, because it ain't B gap. Because if that guy down blocks, let's say that guard down blocks, his job is A gap and down, because he's got to take on the trap. So what I tell him, you're responsible for B gap. Okay, so now inside trap isn't his job. He's getting trapped then. There he is in B gap getting trapped. His job is to shut down inside run on the strong side. A gap, B gap. 1 man cannot block me, 2 men cannot move me. I mean, that's what it sums up to.
So that takes us to let's go strong end next, I suppose.
I think the strong end has one of the most important jobs in football today, because the run's going to go to him more than anything. And there's a lot of football that's not happening inside. And so, power read, he's going to be the read guy. He's got to rush the passer. He's got to close down C gap for regular power and outside zone. And he's got to be able to fight a reach block for a sweep or a toss. And so his job, I would say, is to close down C gap and beyond. And from the standpoint of umbrella run fits, which is what everything should be looked at, he is responsible for constricting the alley, meaning that on an outside run, he has to fight the reach and extend the edge so that when the force player comes down, your strong safety, weak safety, that the amount of space available that the free safety has to cover is as narrow as possible. Even a great free safety, if there's if he immediately gets reached and crushed and there's a 10-yard wide alley, which is the space between the last spill player and the force player, that's a hard open field tackle for an average free safety. Hopefully we have an above average free safety. As we've talked about before, if you have a great free safety, you'll have a good defense, even if everybody else is terrible. If you have a terrible free safety, you'll have a average or below average defense, even if everybody else is good. Because that's the tie-in between the spill and the force. So rushing the passer is what a lot of people think about with ends, but squeezing down C gap on down blocks, whipping that tight end if he tries to down block me, and refusing to be reached on a reach block, and expanding the edge. He can never get collapsed. He can never get collapsed down, driven down where the edge, he's got to expand the edge, and he can't collapse the edge and expand the alley.
I think
So that's his job.
One part you missed there, we are starting to see a little more option play, and
Yep.
right, and he has a role. He's got to come play quarterback in
He's
the
either
option.
got quarterback, depending on how you're playing it. He's either got quarterback. Usually, because of the 3 tech, he will squat and play quarterback if you're playing option. And yeah,
option strong. So
critical. And who's the guy that's the best athlete now?
Yeah,
the quarterback.
It's not him.
Well, I mean, who's the, it used to be the dive back, right? And so let's, old split back veer. The real threat in the option was the 3 tech handling the dive, and along with the Mike backer.
Right.
Well, a lot of our gun options and pistol options, we're way more concerned about the quarterback because we're just taking the most athletic kid we've got, snapping the ball to him. And he's got to be able to make that tackle in space sometimes.
Yeah. But I think it's we've talked. I've always thought linebackers have the hardest job because we need them to fit run, and then at the last second it can be pass, and they're the most torn position. But a strong side, really either defensive end, but especially strong side because he does have to fight with tight ends or whatever. But like you just said,
in theory, 70% of the run should be going to him, so that alone.
So he has to constrict B gap by not letting the edge get extended, and then his very next job is to extend the edge. Right. So through his presence there, keeping things bouncing. And so it's like, man, he really is kind of stuck. Like he can never be too tight. But then, if your force guy isn't fitting.
Well, and that's where the dual read comes in, where he has a pressure key and a visual key.
Yeah.
Most of the time the pressure key is enough, but the visual key will tell him if the tight end goes out, he has to look at the tackle and see, hey, is the tackle pass setting? Because that means it's a pass, and I need to release the tight end and go rush after I've disrupted the tight end. Is he down blocking? That means that it's power, and they're trying to influence me and widen me by arc releasing the tight end. So I've got to now squeeze the down block. Or is he coming to me, which means it's reach, and I've got to fight the reach. That takes work to get really, really good at it. And not many of our players really get to the visual key, especially in first year, partly because most of our teams don't have enough coaches to dedicate drill time to the strong end by himself.
Right.
So it's very difficult to do. But we always thought that the linebackers had the hardest job. Very few teams, some RPO teams, but very few teams are actually threatening the linebackers in the pass.
It's a wasted play. I mean, it's already in the no-fly zone. It's in the no-coverage zone, right?
Right. It's very few teams are threatening linebackers. Like a tight end pop pass type of thing. Like that's not happening very much. That's those types of things. You've got the little mini curl, which is basically the same thing, coming in behind him. That happens, but like he's not mission critical in your pass game. So I would agree with you that the strong end or the strong safety, weak safety, or the free safety, one of those safeties, they have the toughest job, because what happens with them is if I make a wrong move and I get caught inside, the safeties I'm talking about, the force players, I get caught inside, it's a 65-yard run because there is nobody outside of me.
Right.
If I come up on a run and it's a play action because I wasn't patient on my read, it's a 15-yard pass to an open area with an open flat. Those kinds of things are much more glaring than the linebackers. The linebacker's hard job is when he sucks. It just is like
linebacker coaching position. Maybe the hardest position.
Coaching linebackers when you don't have natural linebackers may be one of the hardest things. That's true. Yeah.
So when we start talking nose, what is the role of the nose in the 45?
I mean, it's the same thing. He's an inside run player. He's got centers don't down block very much. I mean, they do, but it's not the same. They're not trapping you. So he's not as he has an easier job. Sometimes you can put him and try to disrupt the center and hammer the center and all those kinds of things. You can put him in a 2-eye, put him on the guard. Sometimes he's the guy who's most responsible for handling the draw, because you'll have him, shift to a bull rush or slow him down. But with your quick guy, get in there and cause havoc. If you're using that guy that we talked about, is get in there and cause havoc. I played in a 3-4 in high school, and I was that guy at nose, but I was a head up nose, and I didn't have a slant call. By the way, I was 2-gap, and I just took out whatever leg stepped, and I could do that. I was good at that, but that was my job, was to whichever leg stepped, I was shooting through, and I was grabbing for ankles and getting kicked in the head. People were tripping over me, and I was at the bottom of the pile if I made a good play, and I didn't get credit for the tackle most of the time, because somebody else did. Because they tripped over the guard, tripped over me, and then there was nobody blocking the linebacker. And the linebacker has 22 tackles, and I have been kicked in the head a lot. So it's not a now you can get some good pass rush, especially if you got a guy that's quicker than me. You can get good interior pass rush, because the fastest path to the quarterback is to the inside, and if he can out quick those tackles and get himself on a running back who doesn't really want to block, he can get some really good pocket pressure that way. But really, his job is to cause chaos if that's what you're using. If he's just a regular nose, his job's the same as a 3-tech. One man cannot block me, 2 men cannot move me.
So that leads us with the weak defensive end. This is where I have used a very athletic guy before. I don't know why. I just enjoyed the strong end being like my safety type. But what you said earlier makes way more sense. Why would you put the safety type where he's going to be taking on double teams and
Right.
all the reach blocks and all that? Like, well, he's got to fight out of it most of the time.
Usually these guys, the ones that we've used, have a lot of linear speed, and it seems like they would be good safeties, but they don't move well, as well laterally. Now we can fix that with athletic speed and movement, and I know that's a plug, but also we can fix that.
Right.
We literally can, and I'll be completely honest. The kids that we've used there in recent years in that capacity, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them didn't work in the offseason. That's how they didn't get a safety job, and that's why they ended up being a defensive end, because they had not gotten the athletic speed and movement work. They didn't have, so that they lost out on a safety job, but they were still in our top 11.
Right.
We've found these guys in the past in like a scout team where it's like, crap, we just need to throw a guy down there. And I've seen this happen multiple times. I've heard a lot of coaches. Scout team, you're like, let's just get we got to have 11 guys. I need 11. I need a defensive ends. There's one guy left. You only got 22. He's like a backup receiver. So he comes over and he lines up a defensive end. And then he dicks your whole day up on offense. He ruins your week because he's just going. And you're like, that's not what he's going to do on game day. And he's like, don't care, have no idea what defensive ends do. And you're like, all right, this kid can play defensive end. And then you do the worst thing that you can do.
Send him to the defensive end coach.
You send him to the defensive line coach, who tries to teach him how to put his hand in the dirt and defeat a base block.
Yeah.
And, I will admit that, no, you're not going to do a great job squeezing down blocks, and you're going to have, he's going to get kicked out sometimes, and you're going to have some problems. But if he's just ripping it up, let him go. Coach up another kid for when you find that team that can get to him, and you do work, hey, you could squeeze that, you could do that. We, years ago, we had a kid who was that kid. And what we did was we pointed him, and I don't teach this now, but this was something that we did, just to give you an idea of one of the things you could do. We lined him up in a 2-point stance, in a sprinter stance at a 45-degree angle, pointed at the outside hip of the tackle. And if the hip of the tackle went down, he came straight down the line of scrimmage off of his butt. And if the hip of the tackle went out, he would shoot inside, and that would let the backer take off scraping for the outside. And he
Brilliant.
would usually get through unblocked because that end was coming to reach him, and he was fast enough to backdoor the reach and be untouched. He would just hit a rip underneath him fast enough that the guard didn't get to him, and then he would kind of bend that path out and just cause chaos. And that worked. And if he went back, he went to a speed rush. So he only had 3 reads. And if they ran screen, he ran to the quarterback.
He's gonna
ain't
beat
got
the
time.
screen. No,
He ain't got time.
They got time to retrace either.
Yeah. So, you when you do things like that, and the shooter knows, you sacrifice a lot of what we teach as far as the technique. But you know at what, to what end he's making plays. Now, very important to know this. And the kid I talked about, the 130-pound kid that played nose, they won a state title. So this is not universal. A lot of times, unless that kid was amazing. A lot of times, in fact, I think he was all state. Like, it's like, I know he was like a, all state wrestler, but he was an all state football player. It was like, he was just unblockable. A lot of times you will, if they're not at that level, if it's just like, the safety who didn't have the lateral movement to play it, but he's a good athlete and you want to have him on the field for you, eventually you will run into a team that will eat him alive because he does not have the technique. But what's your situation? If your situation is he's going to help you win 6 games and you haven't had a winning season in 17 years, put him out there and deal with the fact that you're going to lose 4 because he's not, not solely because of him, but you're going to lose a couple because he's not that guy. It's okay.
So what are some other ways, like more creative ways or whatever? How can we let one of these stars shine? Regardless of position, I guess, or maybe we need to go by position here. I don't know. What are some ways we can use these cats and just really let them be stars?
Initially with defensive line, especially in the early days of teaching your defensive line, you need to be very, very strict on their key reads. And that's why I don't like to get into a lot of twisting and stunting and everything unless you're working it. So as an example, I don't like to do a lot of stunting in a 4-2-5 because the vast majority of our key reads work is from a shade. However, I'm a 3-3 or I'm a 3-4, we're always head up and slanting. All of our key read work is from a head up position. So go nuts. Slant him left, slant him right. I mean, that's they're all doing 2 things, but but you can combine those. But there's a different technique to twists. So getting these guys in different positions or getting them in different looks, getting them freed up with a penetrator and a looper is one way to do it because you don't have to worry about key reads on that. You have to teach the technique of the penetrator and the technique of the looper, and we teach that in our systems. But you don't have to worry so much about messing with your key reads. And you don't do it, you generally don't do a ton of that. You do. I think most teams do. I see teams who do it and they'll do it like twice in a game. It's like, well, I would do it more than that. Or you'll see them do 5 different stunts one time. It's like, I would pick one of those and I would run it 5 times.
Right. It's expensive. That's a lot of time. So
you
might as well use it.
And you really, here's the thing about it, because we almost all, if we have the numbers, we almost all rotate on our defensive line because offensive linemen don't rotate. And we got to get rest for these big guys somewhere. And if you're going to run those twists, you really have to you have to make sure you've got the right personnel in the game. Almost like, I got a running back that runs inside and I got a running back that runs toss. It's like, well, I got a defensive lineman that'll twist and I got a defensive lineman that don't twist. And so I got to have thought process there with them. For sure, you can twist them. You can set up matchups with them. Do you move them down, flip the strength, How can I get? I want them in the strength, obviously, but how can I get him on somebody that can't block him? That's another way to do it. So move him to a shade, move him to an inside shade, outside shade. With the 3 tech, you can't do it as much with the end, but you can find ways to work them around. I do like pinching the ends, what we call echo and cut. I think that's a really good, and kind of along the lines of what we just talked about with that technique with the weak side end. I love bringing that weak side end in there. It also changes up the read on option for him. Commits him to the inside.
So we talk about finding matchups because of the similarity of their positions. I mean, they're all striking a certain part on the hip, outside hip, or lowest part of the
Yeah,
number.
with it, once you take a tight end out, they're all base defense outside shade or base
and
overflow.
then they're just getting their read and playing ball. So
Right.
if I just absolutely need to find that matchup, I can take my stud 3 tech and play him wherever, right?
Play him
I
in a
mean,
five, play him in a 1.
if they
I've
have a
talked
center
before.
that's terrible with pressure in his face,
Sure. He can't shotgun snap because the gigantic guy is about to hit him in the face. Absolutely. Try it. Give it a shot. I always have guys ask about that. And I'm like, I don't know, put him in there and try it. If he doesn't mess up the snap on the first one, try it one more time and then kill it. It's not working.
right?
You don't make that change for the entire game and then you just like have the guy out of position, but try it. It might ruin his night. I don't know. I've talked before, I'm big on strength, and we played a team, and our right tackle, our right strong tackle, Division 1 football player, offensive lineman, but he was our 3 tech. He was all region. Our right end, all region. He played Division 3, but he was all region defensive end. Our strong side, Mike linebacker, is long snapper at Virginia Tech. All region both sides of the ball, I think, tight end and linebacker. Our left side guy was a great kid. Our left side nose was a great kid, weight room kid, senior, been working hard in the program, deserved a shot. Our left side end, great kid, program kid, been in the program 4 years, deserved a shot. Our left, our weak, sorry, our left. I'm picturing in my head, but our weak side linebacker was a great kid, program kid, been in the program 4 years, deserved a shot. They all were good high school football players. But the right side and the right side strong safety was all state. And so the right side and the free safety played Division 3. So they were all really good football players on the strong. I keep saying right, the strong side, and on the weak side, they were all good kids and good football players, but not standouts. So they started running weak, obviously, and they ran weak and they ran weak and they ran weak. So we just moved, because guess what? Their strong side was their best offensive lineman. They didn't move the offensive lineman. They just started running the other way. Well, guess what? We now take our all region strong end, flip him with the weak end, and now he's on your less capable tackle where you're running the ball at him. All right, problem solved. It only took one of them to fix that, because everybody has a drop off somewhere.
Right. I just want you to know the riders.
And you also can set your strength to their good players too.
The riders of Remember the Titans are super angry with you because the right side was not strong side. It was left side. So
I know, but in my head, you're
picturing it wrong.
I'm picturing the plays from the film, and the strength was always to the right.
Absolutely.
For us. So in my head, I'm picturing that. Because they were running into the boundary and they couldn't run it to the field. And so they just strength stayed the same spot. You also forced them to run to a phone booth too, which is fine. All right.
Are there any other ways that we can highlight one of these star D linemen?
Well, you can get your defensive ends into pass rush, setups and things like that. But I think stunts are the biggest thing that they can do. You can do some crossfires with your, some X blitzes with your linebackers. Yeah. Again, just to create different looks. You can create some different looks with them, like a bullet strong X where your blitz Mike backer goes B gap and the 3-tech slants into A gap, things like that. They give a different look.
And if you show that, you can mess with counts, and now maybe your stud at line kind of gets to come free. Maybe they mess up a double team or
Yeah.
a combo or whatever because there's a linebacker sitting in B gap now, right behind this giant D lineman.
Yeah. So I mean, changing up fronts, changing up, using some stunts, using some blitz deals, setting up matchups, getting them in the positions to, making sure that your strength is the strength. All of that is going to get them. Ultimately, you want to get the studs in the places to make plays. Your weak side end, he is not the guy that you want them running at. He is the guy that you want running it down.
Right.
And so you kind of want him to be the weak side, the side that they don't run to that much as possible. And so you just want to make sure that you set those guys where their talents and what makes them special is best used. You don't take your weak side end and say, well, all defensive linemen are defensive linemen. My weak side end is causing havoc at weak side end, so I'm going to put him at 3 tech. Like that's not how this works.
All right. Well, I think we did all the things. We checked all the boxes. We talked about all the D linemen. I'm sure there's other ways we didn't mention to highlight one of these dudes, but I think that's some good stuff moving forward. Time to pay the bills.
I mean, the only other thing that I could think of is zone dropping.
I was going to ask about it, but you get into like, especially with your weak side defensive end. Yeah, it just comes weird because who's the guy you're dropping? And my experience with it was I was bad at coaching it because we don't do it. And then so when I used it in the game, we had a now screen, just a turn and catch it by an X went for about 85 yards. So
generally where I want him going is I really prefer I would use like a slam, with the nose or the 3 tech, and I would drop the strong or the weak end to the middle. I've dropped the nose when I had that shooter nose. I have dropped him to the middle and ran some different stunts with that. But it is hard to teach because they've still got to play the run. They can't just drop. If it just drop, you're really kind of screwing yourself up.
Yeah.
So they've got to step key read. It's basically a new key read drill where I step and I do all my normal key reads, but then when I get past, I take off. Yeah. So you've got a key read drill for that, and that's not worth it to me enough to use it. It definitely slows down their charge, but I have done it. I prefer to drop them to the middle of the field because generally the coverage, again, there's not a lot of damage being done across the middle of the field. What they'll get is quarterbacks who break the cardinal rule of throwing over the middle late. They will show up and a quarterback will make that mistake of throwing over the middle late, and that's why you don't do it, is because those zone droppers show up out of nowhere.
With pan hands because they're defensive linemen. But, that's good.
Yes.
Pay the bills to get out of here. We usually do a very generic, I read this list of things that I want to talk about for pay the bills, but tonight I just really want to focus on the fundamentals that is taught in Joe Daniel football. It is join.joedanielfootball.com. You can get access for $1. It's 7 days. Like Joe said, right now is the best time to use that trial because if you go platinum with your trial, you get your very first game film analysis for $1. And then, the rest of them are going to be just as useful, but you get to fill that out and see what it's like. The biggest thing is it doesn't matter if you're a position coach. I understand that you're probably learning a system that isn't this, but it will teach you how to coach your position and how it fits in all the other positions. And you may even learn something you can take back and be like, hey, I know we're getting beat here. And maybe it's because we're in a 4-2-5 and our defensive end is going outside on a tight end. Okay. He doesn't need to play 9. If you're a head coach, maybe you're really, really good at what you do and your staff is struggling to come along. Consider it. Consider just jumping on, look at it for a week. You've got time to look at the system you're already running anyway, whether it be offense or defense. And then that's something you can just give to your guys, right? That's the thing is you get one, you add the others for free.
Want, but yeah, it's a defense in a box if that's what you want.
Yeah.
If that's what you want.
But they don't just learn alignments and assignments. I kind of feel like a lot of coaching takes place with this is how we align and this is what we do to everything. Here's 2 rules, and that's how my outside linebacker lives all of his life, right? Hit this guy and read that guy. Well, Yeah, okay. Well, that doesn't always work. What do you do when it gets broken? What do you do when it gets exposed? Well, that's what the system is for. The system pulls everything back in. It gives you a reason why. And the why nots. I've learned as many why nots from Joe Daniel football as I have whys because I still see the Twitter, I still see the YouTube, the what's the crazy giant lot of
It's called
videos.
X. It's called X.
Oh, my bad, the X.
Yeah.
Very, very sorry. But I see all the videos out there of all these defenses, and you want to put that play in just like offense does. We want to do, oh, that's a sweet blitz. We learn the whys and the why nots. Maybe it does fit, and you can tie it into your system, but maybe it doesn't. So get in, and it's a great place to learn how to coach your position. It's a great place to learn how the run fits are supposed to work. It's a great place to learn how these coverages work together and where their help is coming from. Yeah, so join.joedanielfootball.com, access for $1. Get all the things. We've talked about it.